Welcome to Diving into the Grand Line, the series where we dive into a topic within the world of One Piece. Today we'll be discussing the first of Luffy's gears, Gear Second. Gear Second first appeared during the Enies Lobby arc, specifically chapter 387 of the manga, which correlates to episode 272 of the anime. The technique first appeared during Luffy's fight with Blue No, with Luffy completely thrashing him once he introduced it. Luffy developed the technique following his fight with Aokiji and also seeing the other CP9 members using Soro, another technique that allows its user to move at incredibly fast speeds. Prior to the time skip, Luffy would start this technique by pumping his legs to increase blood flow throughout his body. This increases Luffy's speed and mobility. Now being able to use Soro himself, Luffy's other attacks now have a jet suffix added to them to show how much quicker and faster they are. During this state, he speeds up the blood flow in certain parts of the body to give them more oxygen and nutrients, which makes them a lot more faster and powerful. This in turn causes Luffy to become hungry and tired faster because of the amount of oxygen and energy this technique uses. He can sometimes even become paralyzed, like in his fight against Rob Lucci. During this technique, Luffy's skin also notably turns pinkish and begins to ooze steam. This look is caused by his metabolism rising up so high, making his sweat vaporize rapidly, which causes this look. After seeing the technique in action, Rob Lucci compares this technique to blood doping. Blood doping involves the misuse of certain techniques and or substances like EPO to increase one's red blood cell mass, which allows the body to transport more oxygen to the muscles and therefore increase stamina and performance. Once the technique wears off, Luffy can quickly recover by eating his choice of meat. When he first started using the technique, Luffy could only use it in short periods of time due to the amounts of nutrients this technique uses up. Rob Lucci even states that he believes this technique will shorten Luffy's lifespan, but every new technique in this series shortens the user's lifespan, so it doesn't really mean anything to Luffy. In later arcs such as the Impel Down arc, Luffy is shown to be able to use this technique a lot longer, also being able to use it in short bursts. Notably, Luffy also uses the technique during movie 7, that's supposed to take place before the Water 7 arc. During this movie, Luffy unknowingly activates Gear Second, defeating Ratchet, the villain of the movie, with a Gum Gum Jet Bazooka. I know that it's non-canon, but I felt like it deserved a mention. Following the time skip, Luffy is shown to have mastered this technique even further, not even needing to assume the original stance anymore. Here he is shown to activate it by simply pumping blood in whatever body part of choice. He is also shown combining this technique with armament haki, of course making it much more powerful. Nowadays though, this technique isn't really used that much, mostly used at the start or warm-up of a fight, similar to what Goku does with his Super Saiyan transformation. Speaking of Goku, this technique has often been compared to Goku's Kaioken technique. Both techniques emit a reddish-pinkish aura. Both are used to increase the speed and power of its users, with eventually both of them learning to use the technique in short bursts. Both of them are shown to have similar body fatigue effects, and both are introduced in similar ways, with them completely embarrassing the opponent they're first used on. It doesn't matter if this technique was inspired by Dragon Ball or not, however, because it's definitely come to its own, and Gear Second is one of my favorite of the gears, until a certain other gear, which we'll definitely get into in a future video. And with that, I'll end the first episode of Diving into the Grand Line, a little bit of a short one, but what can you do? I hope you enjoyed this little video, and I hope to see you on the next one. Welcome back to Diving into the Grand Line, the series where we dive deep into a topic from the world of One Piece. Today we'll be discussing Luffy's Gear Third technique. We'll be discussing its origins, how it works, and its effects and repercussions on Luffy. So without any further ado, let's go ahead and get into it. Gear Third was first used off-screen in chapter 403 of the manga, which correlates to episode 288 of the anime, being used to knock down a steel door. The technique is first used on-screen in chapter 421 of the manga, which correlates to episode 304 of the anime, being used during Luffy's fight with Rob Lucci. Luffy developed this technique right around the same time he developed Gear Second, which was after his fight with Aokiji in the Long Ring Long Land arc. The technique is first hinted at during Luffy's fight with Blue No, but like I mentioned before, it's not used until chapter 403 and is not seen by the viewer until chapter 421 of the manga. Luffy starts his technique by putting his thumb in his mouth and blowing up his arm similar to a balloon, making it become giant. The size of his arm is comparable to that of a giant itself, like oars for example. After this, he is able to transfer the air into any body part he chooses, or he can just keep it in his arm. Despite comparing it to blowing up a balloon earlier, once he blows it up, his arm or whatever body part he blows up is definitely much harder than a balloon, and when he punches you, you will definitely feel it. It packs a huge punch is basically what I'm trying to say. This technique also allows Luffy to use a plethora of giant moves such as Bone Balloon, Gum Gum Giant Pistol, Gum Gum Giant Axe, among many others. Despite how powerful this technique is, it sacrifices a lot of speed, with Luffy even having trouble moving around in the form early on. It also takes a little bit of time for Luffy to transfer all the air into other body parts, giving potential opponents an opening and time to attack. At least early on, this technique was just pure power and used to deliver big blows and not much else, due to how slow it made Luffy move. Before the time skip, Gear 3 was incredibly difficult for Luffy to control and move around in, making this technique pretty useless against fast opponents such as Rob Lucci for example. To get out of this form, Luffy simply blows all the air out and flies backwards, similar to a balloon losing all of its air. This, however, causes Luffy to shrink, which is by far the biggest drawback of this form, leaving Luffy completely powerless. The amount of time this drawback is in effect depends on how long Luffy was using Gear 3 for. Basically, the amount of time Luffy was using Gear 3 is the amount of time this drawback will be in effect. The best thing Luffy can do when this drawback kicks in is literally just run and hide, because any attack he tries to do will have no effect. A pretty funny example of this is when Rob Lucci just has Luffy in a chokehold just against the wall, and then he tries to punch him and it does nothing but make him madder. Later uses of this technique, such as the Impel Down arc and the Marineford arc, show him being able to use the technique at much faster speeds, but this drawback is still present. Until the time skip, that is. After the time skip, however, similar to Gear 2, he's shown to have mastered this technique. For example, he is now able to better control where the air he puts into his body, where it goes. For example, I know I said that twice, but bear with me. For example, he can put the air into his fist. Before it would just go into his arm, just go all into his arm, but now he could just concentrate all of that air to his fist for a much bigger impact, and because of that, it can now go much faster, because not all of his arm is big like that. Like I just mentioned, this makes attacks much faster, and it eliminates the slowness that plagued this technique pre-time skip. Oda also revealed in SBS that the shrinking drawback is no longer an issue. Luffy doesn't shrink anymore. I don't think it's explicitly said in the series, but obviously if you watch the show, he doesn't shrink after using Gear 3 anymore, so you could come to that conclusion anyway. He's also able to control how big his body parts get now. Of course, before the time skip, it really depended on how much air was in his body, how much air he blew into his thumb, and that determined how big, his body parts would get. And like with Gear 2, he is now able to use this technique with armament haki. We've seen multiple instances of him doing this. He is also shown being able to use this technique defensively. Of course, before this, it was basically used for pure offense, pure power, just a big punch. That's basically what this form was used for. But now he could use it defensively too. It just shows how much he's mastered this form. But much like Gear 2 nowadays, this technique is mostly used at the beginning or warm-ups of fights. With the advent of better gears, he doesn't really use it as much. Of course, before Gear 4, he did use it a bunch post time skip, so we did get a lot of uses of it still. And also, the use of this technique has birthed some of the most iconic moments in the series. One of my favorites, and one of the most recent, is when he used Gum Gum Red Rock on Kaido. One of the best moments in the entire series. That's in my top 10. Definitely amazing. But I think that's it for this video. Where does Gear 3 rank with all the other gears in your opinion? In my opinion, out of all the gears, Gear 2, 3, 4, 5, I think this is probably above Gear 4 for me, because I just don't really like Gear 4. I don't really like how it's designed. So actually, let me put Bounce Man and Tank Man together, and I'm gonna put Snake Man by itself. I think the Bound Man and Tank Man are probably the worst ones in my opinion. I don't really like how they're designed. That's probably the worst one, and then Gear 3, and then Snake Man. I do like how Snake Man is designed. That was definitely an improvement for me. But it's basically ranks around there. Above that is Gear 2nd and Gear 5, of course. But that's where it ranks for me. Where does it rank for you? What is your favorite moments of Luffy using Gear 3rd? And yeah, but with that, that's all from me, and I'll see you on the next one. Gear 4, Tank Man, and Bound Man, I'll probably put them together. It will definitely not take as long as this video did. So, but yeah, like I said, see you on the next one. Welcome back to Diving Into the Grand Line, the series where we dive deep into topics straight from the world of One Piece. Today we'll be discussing Luffy's Gear 4th transformation technique and all of its variants. We'll be discussing how it works, where it came from, and its effects and repercussions on Luffy. So without any further ado, let's go ahead and get into it. Gear 4th was first used in chapter 784 of the manga, which correlates to episode 726 of the anime, specifically during Luffy's fight with Doflamingo. Luffy actually developed this technique during the 2-year time skip while training at Ruskaina, with some of the training actually being shown on screen. In real life, this form is based on the guardian deity called the Neo statue, relating to Luffy's will to want to protect his friends with his life. This was revealed by Oda in volume 79's SBS, with him also saying that there are multiple things that he could have picked from that shows power, but he decided to take some from his homeland, which of course is Japan. Later on in the Wano arc, Hoyogoro even compares Luffy's Gear 4 to a guardian deity as well. Luffy activates this technique by first coating his entire arm in armament haki, then biting it, blowing massive amounts of air into his body, similar to Gear 3rd. But unlike Gear 3rd, he inflates his entire body, basically becoming a big balloon. Armament haki is needed for this form to function, with it pretty much being the backbone of this form. He coats damn near his entire body in this stuff, resulting in them turning black due to hardening. In this form, he has wispy fire-looking things around his chest, which is from the haki, giving it the look of tattoos, and he also develops eyeliner around his eyes. This form also emits large amounts of steam, similar to Gear 2nd. He also grows much taller in this form, growing to a whopping 13 feet or 4 meters tall. For comparison, Luffy's normal height is around 5'7", so you see the huge difference. Another similarity to Gear 2nd is that he's able to use the 6 powers or abilities similar to the 6 powers in this form, such as Soru, for example. This form makes up for Gear 2nd's lack of strength and Gear 3rd's lack of speed by increasing both his speed and power to a crazy degree. He is also able to use it better defensively, similar to Gear 3rd, but of course is a lot better now. He is also a lot more durable, with attacks bouncing off of him, with him also being able to counterattack depending on which variant of the form he uses. And like I just mentioned, and I mentioned a few times before, Luffy is also able to use different variants of the form depending on the situation, which of course we will get into later. Despite all the upsides that come with Luffy using this form, there's also its number of drawbacks that affect Luffy greatly. Once this form runs out of time, Luffy is left barely moving and unable to use haki for a while, which leaves him vulnerable for attack if the enemy isn't dealt with already. To keep it simple, if Luffy doesn't get the job done in the time allotted, he will be completely powerless. One instance of this form being used even had Luffy passed out for 3 whole days. I think this was in the Dressrosa arc, by the way. Luffy has gotten a little better at controlling these drawbacks as the series has gone on, but of course, there's still a problem to this day. Luffy is able to use 3 variations of this form: the most balanced and default form, Bound Man, one that specializes in durability, which is Tank Man, and one that specializes in speed, which is Snake Man. Bound Man is Gear 4's default variant and is the first one we see, and it was first used against Doflamingo on Dressrosa. With this variant, Luffy becomes much larger in size, with his proportions going all out of whack. Like, dude's whole upper body becomes huge, like humongous. Multiple body parts, of course, are also coated in armament haki. This specific variant was created during Luffy's training on Ruskaina to make it easier for Luffy to combat all the big animals and monsters on the island. A side effect of this form is because of his warp size, Luffy is not able to stand still on the ground and is constantly bouncing, hence the name Bound Man or Bounce Man if you're watching the dub. Luffy also has trouble keeping his balance sometimes after attacking, constantly stumbling over himself, which of course gives enemies an opening for an attack. To sum it up though, this technique hits hard and it delivers big blows, and it also has good durability and pretty good speed. Like I said, it's the most balanced of the three. The next variant we're going to discuss is Tank Man, which is the durability focused one. We've only ever seen Luffy use this form once during a fight against Charlotte Cracker, and we've never even seen his base form due to Luffy eating a ton of biscuits, making him big and fat, giving us the stuffed version of this form, resembling a sumo wrestler actually. In this form, most of the air goes to Luffy's torso, increasing his durability considerably, tanking a lot of Cracker's attacks when he was previously unable to in Bound Man. The fire-shaped haki also covers the bottom of his torso this time around. The next and my personal favorite variant is the speed-focused one, which is Snake Man. Unlike the other variations, Luffy's body doesn't expand as much, with only his legs and upper torso expanding, with the rest of his proportions remaining mostly the same. Luffy's haki in this variant is concentrated to his arms and legs specifically so that he's able to catch Katakuri's observation haki, whose ability to see into the future was giving Luffy tons of problems during his battle. Like I mentioned before, this variant specializes in speed, with his speed increasing incredibly using this form, and he is now able to control the direction of his attacks using Python. If an attack doesn't hit, it gets faster, so the more the opponent dodges the attack or the more Luffy misses, the faster and stronger the attack gets until it finally hits. Another big proponent of this form is Luffy's heightened observation haki, with him able to be faster than Katakuri, which I mentioned before was able to see into the future by a few seconds. This form does come with a few drawbacks though. Unlike the previous forms, this one is not as good defensively, with Luffy still taking heavy attacks from Katakuri during their final battle, but he was still able to pull through due to his heightened speed, power, and observation haki. With Gear 4, Luffy is able to use many new attacks, including Gum Gum Kongun, Gum Gum Calverine, which is Gear 4's version of Gum Gum Pistol, Gum Gum King Kong Gun, Gum Gum Cannonball, the only new technique that Tank Man introduces, Gum Gum Jet Calverine, Gum Gum Black Mamba, Gum Gum King Cobra, among a few others. My favorite attack though is definitely King Kong Gun. That is hard. I love that attack. One last thing I wanted to mention about Gear 4 is, like Gear 2, this form has some similarities with another Dragon Ball form, this time being Super Saiyan 4, with them both having a very similar design. But that's pretty much it in terms of Gear 4. Before the advent of Gear 5, of course, this was the final form. It was definitely the final boss form. It was used in a bunch of battles before Gear 5, so I think it had a pretty good run in the spotlight. And yeah, it's a good form. My personal thoughts on Gear 4 though, I think I've always been mixed on Bound Man's design. I think most moments where Gear 4 is used, I think most of them are pretty hype. But like I said, I'm pretty mixed on Bound Man's design, and we haven't even seen Tank Man's base form. We've never seen it, and I don't think we will see it, I'm not gonna lie. Snake Man though is definitely my favorite form, my favorite variant of this transformation, whatever. It's my favorite. I love the sleek design, I love the streamlined design, I love it, and I love, I just like speedy characters. I like, fast. Yeah, if I ever, if I got superpowers, I definitely pick the speed, because, you go against a stronger opponent, you can, outrun them. So I definitely like speed, and I think it's just a cooler design form personally, But that's pretty much all for me for this video. I still didn't like how long it took me to make this video. It took me around 2 weeks, and I need to start getting the videos out faster. Gear 5 definitely won't take this long. Maybe it might, only because I have a Pokemon Explained episode all recorded, so I might go ahead and upload that. I gotta figure out where I'm gonna upload everything, but I am gonna get to Gear 5 as soon as possible, try to get it done. So yeah, that's all for me, and I'll see you on the next video. Welcome back once again to Diving Into the Grand Line, the series where we dive deep into topics straight from the world of One Piece. Today we'll finally be discussing my favorite of the gears, Gear 5, otherwise known as Luffy's Peak. We'll be discussing its origins and influences, how it works, and of course its effects and repercussions on Luffy. So without any further ado, let's go ahead and get into it. Gear 5 was first used in chapter 1044 of the manga, which correlates to episode 1071 of the anime. This was during Luffy's final fight against Kaido. Although episode 1071 is when it was fully revealed, it did have a brief appearance in One Piece Film Red exactly a year prior. Before any of this though, Oda actually hinted at Gear 5 in volume 98's SBS, where someone asked him what's coming up in the manga, with him responding that the world was moving towards 5G networks. Get it? 5G, Gear 5. But anyway, Gear 5 is the awakened form of Luffy's Gomu Gomu no Mi, formerly known as the Hito Hito no Mi model Nika, as revealed in this arc as well, or the human fruit in English, and it functions similarly to an awakening of a Paramecia devil fruit. This form provides an increase in Luffy's strength and speed, of course, but more importantly, it allows much more freedom, allowing him to fight in whatever way he wants to. This form has been said to bring joy and freedom to everyone around it, with Luffy being dubbed the Warrior of Liberation because of this form's ridiculous power and nature, which the form is also described as the most ridiculous power in the world. Gear 5 takes inspiration from old school rubber hose animation, from the old Tom and Jerry Looney Tunes, Mickey Mouse shorts, that type of animation. Following the serious Gear 4th form, Oda wanted to draw something more fun to bring the fun aspect back to shonen manga, as over time the genre has been drawn out with super serious fights with little fun or comedy within them. He wanted to create a contrast between Kaido's seriousness and Luffy's free cartooniness. Luffy's transformation into this form begins with a distinct change in his heartbeat, in which Zunisha dubs the Drums of Liberation. And once transformed, Luffy has a radically different appearance from any of his other gears and any other transformation in the series for that matter. In this form, all of Luffy's clothes turn white except for his straw hat, sandals, and belt. In addition to this, white clouds appear around his neck and his pupils turn red. His eyebrows also turn white, with them also becoming bouncy and swirly. All of this reverts once Luffy deactivates Gear 5, of course, though. As with any transformation, this form increases Luffy's strength, durability, and speed, but the difference between other ones is that this form does it to an absurd degree. He was able to finally defeat Kaido after losing about 4 times, and he's able to tank several of his attacks, coming out almost completely unscathed. Kaido was built up to be unbeatable and feared by pretty much everyone who came across him, so the fact that Luffy is now on equal footing with him is an insane feat in itself. Later on in the Egghead arc, Luffy is able to overpower Rob Lucci in both strength and speed in his own awakened form, easily, by the way. And it's so crazy seeing that, remembering how much trouble Lucci was giving Luffy way back when on Enies Lobby, like, what a fall from grace, right? But even after taking crazy attacks from people like Kaido, Lucci, and now Kizaru, Luffy's able to get right back up and fight. Another feat in this form is that he is now able to spin his legs fast enough to the point where he's running in mid-air. Now, like I mentioned before, the real big thing with this form, it grants Luffy much more freedom and flexibility. Freedom as in Luffy's able to attack however he wants, and he's free to do whatever he wants, and of course he takes this to the cartoony extreme. Kaido compares this to something out of a picture book, quote unquote, but I think a better example would be an old cartoon character like Bugs Bunny or something. A good example of how cartoony this gets is when Kaido hits Luffy with his Hasakai, and I don't even want to describe this scene, I just want to show it to you yourself. I want you to see it for yourself. I can't describe this. To put it simple, when Luffy's in this form, he becomes the embodiment of squash and stretch animation. Luffy is also able to use the limb inflation of Gear 3rd and the muscle inflation of Gear 4th without having to blow air into his body. He's able to make his arms so huge, in fact, that he was able to crash into the Skull Dome and yank Kaido's transformed body out of him and swing him around like a ragdoll. He's also able to turn himself into a massive giant, so this form is just overpowered. Luffy's rubbery body can also manipulate the environment around him. For example, he was shown to be able to extend a section of the roof to bounce back Kaido's bolo breath without the material burning whatsoever. This is Kaido we're talking about. He was able to do this to Kaido. To Kaido's attack. This form is so overpowered. He's also shown to be able to make surfaces in order to cushion his falls, and he can also manipulate things like Kaido's body. For example, when he got swallowed, making Kaido's body inflate. He can also materialize things, stuff as goggles, but this is typical gag humor. Despite the disgusting amount of pros with this form, it does come with its own set of drawbacks, of course, like any transformation. Because of Luffy's inexperience when using this form, he kind of just transforms into it all randomly, it consumes tons of energy when in use, causing Luffy to look like a used condom after using it. Despite that, Luffy can transform right back into this form by forcing his heartbeat to be in rhythm with the drums of liberation, so it's not too big of a deal, I'll admit. Awakenings of Zou and Devil Fruits also have the risk of whatever animal the fruit is derived from taking over the user's mind. In Luffy's case, it's the sun god Nika. Onto the attacks, this form introduces a plethora of brand new attacks for Luffy to use. These attacks include Gum Gum Balloon, Gum Gum Giant, which is basically if Gear 3rd extended to his entire body, Gum Gum Barrage Gun, which is Gear 5's version of Gum Gum King Kong Gun, Gum Gum Mole Pistol, Gum Gum Dawn Whip, and Gum Gum Dawn Rocket. Some other attacks include Gum Gum Lightning, Gum Gum Dawn Stamp, and my favorite, Gum Gum Jump Rope. Gear 5 seems to be Luffy's last gear, as it's been referred to as Luffy's peak, and what a form to end on, I must say. Gear 5 is easily my favorite of all the gears, and it's been so much fun to read and now watch this form in action, and I'm so happy that Oda took the route that he did in subverting everyone's expectations, and I can't wait to see more of this form down the line. I hope you enjoyed this episode of diving into the Grand Line, as I've now finished going over all of the gears. I'm not gonna lie, I don't know what my next video is or what my next episode on Grand Line is gonna be at the moment, but it will be out soon, and I hope you enjoyed this episode, and I can't wait to see you on the next video. I'm out.